300, and these are all at the patrons' requests. Delegate Bulova has asked for House Bill 464 to go by. Delegate Hope, House Bill 685, and Delegate Fowler has asked that House Bill 1250 all go by for the day.
So moved. Second.
All right, anybody have an objection to that? Okay. So, our first bill that we're going to hear today will be, I'm going to see who's on our committee. Delegate Freitas, is he here? Don't see Delegate Freitas. All right. Delegate Simon.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon. Good to see everybody. I have House Bill 1021. This comes to me actually at the request of a constituent who's here, and we may, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I'll have him come up now and stand next to me as I do this, because he's really the expert on this particular issue. This is Matthew Quinn of Quinn's Auction House in Falls Church. What this bill does is it creates a definition, two different definitions, a definition of designer spirit bottles and a definition of vintage bottles for spirits. And the reason the bill is necessary is because in Virginia, the legislature made the decision a few years ago that we would allow licensed auctioneers to sell, outside of the ABC store process, to sell alcohol and distilled spirits on behalf of their clients in an auction. And the administrative code says they can do that provided that the alcohol is designer or vintage. But there's no definition of what constitutes designer or vintage anywhere, not in the administrative code, not in our code, or anything else. Mr. Quinn's been selling these things. Goes, there's an estate, cleans out the house, finds the valuable things, puts them up for auction, and was selling alcohol as he's always done. And somebody essentially dropped a dime to ABC and said, "You can't sell that. It's illegal. You're doing an online sale." And he said, "Well, I can, of course. They're designer and vintage." And then we ran into this problem of what we had an enforcement problem. Well, what does that constitute? Are these really designer or vintage? Where does it say what you can do or what you can't? So what this bill is designed to do is come up with a definition so that people in this business have some predictability, know what they're allowed to do, know what they're not allowed to do. Keeps these sales here in Virginia, by the way, because other states don't have these sort of restrictions. But with that, I will, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, turn it over to Mr. Quinn to sort of explain why he thinks this is necessary, why we think it's necessary.
Thank you, Delegate Simon. Madam Chair, members of the committee, this came about this last July when we had a client who had about $60,000 worth of distilled spirits in an estate. We brought those in, when we cataloged them, we put them up for auction, and we were notified that we couldn't do that. I said, of course we can. 3 VAC 57230 says so. It has 4 provisions in that law. It has to be a sealed bottle, it has to be a licensed auctioneer. I have to notify the board, and there's one other, I'm blanking on, my apologies. Very simple things. When I addressed that with ABC, they came back threatening action and said that I couldn't do it because those definitions weren't defined. So I contacted my delegate and asked him to help define this and get this right. I'm in Falls Church. I can drive across the Potomac and do this in Maryland, do this in Virginia, or do this in Maryland, do it in D.C., but I preferred to keep it at home and fix this. And so we proposed some brief definitions based on Webster and a little bit of common sense that you have before you. And I think this is fairly simple. So if there's any questions, I'm certainly happy to address those. Yeah. Did I miss anything?
Nope, I think that's it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone on the committee have a question? For either Delegate Simon or the expert? Is someone from ABC here that can speak to this?
Hey, how are you?
Doing well.
Nice to see you.
You too.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, John Daniel for Virginia ABC. We have had lots of discussions over the course of the summer with Mr. Quinn in an effort to try to get him to yes, if you will. The concern we have with the bill as written is fairly simple. It begins to create a secondary market for alcoholic beverages. And that's not something that we have customarily done, or in fact, we've tried to move away from that. We do currently have pending to be published in the Register, I think on the 31st of this month, a circular letter which will define designer and vintage and candidly, it is on us. We have a regulation that uses the terms design and designer and vintage, and we don't have a definition for those. We've used some longstanding interpretations of what those terms mean, but given the import of this, defining them in the regulation seemed the better course at this time. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can, Madam Chair.
Delegate Van Valkenburg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I just a question for ABC. Can he tell us what those definitions that are coming out will be?
In fact, I have the circular here. Sorry. You got them? Yeah, oh, it's on the back. They do, you know, they put these things on the back. So the words designer and vintage will be, one, the original manufacturer's unopened bottle. The product must be bottled for at least 20 years, not owned by a distillery, and the sale shall not be conducted on behalf of a distillery, manufacturer, or wholesaler, and conjunctively not otherwise available for purchase from ABC.
So that was the definition for designer?
Yeah, and vintage.
Oh, okay.
Collectively.
Did you have one for vintage as well, or you do not?
Oh, no, that was it.
Oh, so it covers both of them, okay. Delegate Knight?
Mr. Daniel? When
Yes,
did you,
sir.
when did you say these regulations were going to come out?
They're going to be published in the Register on the 31st of this month, so a week from today, basically.
So the 31st of this month. What I was kind of wondering out loud, Delegate Simon, is we've got a couple of options the way that I see it, you know, is we can take Mr. Daniels' regulations and his definition and amend your bill and put it in code, or I see where we can take and just pass this bill by for the day, you know, for the week, see what his regulations do, and if you're satisfied with that, we don't need your bill.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chairman, Mr. Delegate Knight, a couple things about the definition that you guys just heard. First, I mean, if you just listen to it, it doesn't really define, it talks about what it can't be. It doesn't talk about what it is, right? So we think, for a couple of reasons, that the code is the better place to make this definition. The General Assembly has decided that how we're going to regulate spirits in Virginia, and we're going to allow most of the sales to be primarily through ABC stores with some exceptions. We've granted an exception for licensed auctioneers, limited to designer and vintage bottles. What this regulation does is essentially says you can't do it. I mean, it's got to be, it's not otherwise available for purchase at ABC. One, it doesn't even define designer and vintage separately. I mean, clearly designer means something different, I think, to most people than vintage would. Yet what we have is a combined definition of designer and the regulation says it's designer or vintage, right? So you don't need to be able, it doesn't need to be both. Either one could do it. I think our definitions are better. So I think even if this regulation goes into effect, I don't think my constituents' problem is really solved. That's, I guess, what I'm saying. I think that it's okay in this case. I mean, sometimes if it requires some special expertise, you know, I understand deferring to the agency to promulgate regulations if it's beyond sort of the comprehension or the expertise of the General Assembly. I think this is one of those cases where we can use, again, some common sense and some Webster's Dictionary and give an actual definition that gives folks like my constituent and other auctioneers and other folks in the business some predictability so that they can do business, continue to conduct business without the uncertainty of knowing whether ABC is going to interpret this as something they can or can't do. Because if the definition is it's got to be original, it's got to be bottled for at least 20 years, and it's not owned by the distillery. I mean, that doesn't really tell me much of anything about what makes it designer, what makes it vintage, what makes it special or unique. So I appreciate it. This is sort of the problem we've had, right? We've been trying to work with ABC, and this is the part of the reason we've never been able to get them to yes, in my view, frankly, is they keep coming back with this sort of circular logic that never really gets us anywhere forward. So that's why I think the bill is the better way to go, Delegate Knighton, Madam Chairman.
Delegate Knight?
Delegate Simon, for your expert there, do you have a rough idea of how many times a year you would need a definition like this to be able to comply?
I mean, I represent, hundreds of estates a year, and very many of them have some random bottle of bourbon that hasn't been opened, some random bottle of gin that hasn't been opened. So it would come up more often than you realize. There aren't always these large estates like we described, but this, as defined in one word, would have eliminated that entire sale. Well, maybe 60, 70% of it.
Okay. What I'm kind of wondering, and this may be a question for Mr. Daniel, is to me it looks like you're saying that Mr. Daniel's definition is a little bit narrow or broad depending on your perspective, and and we're kind of looking at this and I'm thinking yours isn't fleshed out, and I didn't know if there was some time where it was ambiguity there. Mr. Daniel, is it just too many times? Do we need to flesh this definition out? Or is there something where the gentleman could contact y'all and y'all could give him a pretty quick answer on he can do it or he can't, or what he can do or he can't do? Because, I understand his concern looks broad. I understand your concern. It's just not really fleshed out well to satisfy me.
Well, Delegate Knight, I mean, I'm happy to continue to talk with Delegate Simon and Mr. Quinn between now and the full committee to see if we can flesh it out in a way that might be more accommodating. The definition is, we've worked on the definition of pretty hard, and while I understand it says what you can't do, that too in itself can be a definition. But we can't have we don't believe we can have situations where just because an individual may think a bottle is special or it is unique in some fashion, that it ought to be able to be sold on the open market. I mean, the 20 years is pretty important. The other pushback we get, frankly, is from some suppliers who do not want their products, Sazerac as an example, sold on the open market in a secondary market. So we're trying to balance between the desires of Mr. Quinn as an individual business person and what we also hear from our major suppliers for the Commonwealth. So.
Delegate von Falkenberg, you have another question?
Yeah, I guess, Madam Chair, and this might be for both of you. This is such an abstract conversation. Can you give me like a specific example of like where the one definition would do something that the other wouldn't, right? So like, is it just a function of the age that's the problem in the definition of ABC? Or like, I'm trying to figure out like how the two definitions would create a situation where something might not be. Do you see what I'm saying? Sure.
We actually went through this exercise when we had this particular sale with about 96 individual items, and we went through and said which would be designer, which would be vintage, and why. In some cases, both. You might see a bottle like we had a group of Tanqueray bottles that had tax stamps on them with the date 1971 on them. Okay, by current rule, I was told I couldn't do that. Now, Tanqueray is sold by ABC, so by this definition, that bottle wouldn't have allowed to have been sold, even though it has a date on it of 1971. Because when you put the "and" word in there and you combine these two definitions, they step on each other. So, because Tanqueray is sold by ABC. So I put in a couple different specifics relative to my definition of vintage that you see in Delegate Simon's bill that get into some things that make them different. When we get into designer, there are things that make something designer that may not. I mean, people stand in line to buy certain bottles at ABC today. I mean, does ABC want someone to go buy, a bottle of Blanton's for $60 and turn around and sell it for $180? I don't know what the difference is. If we do it legally, the state gets tax revenue. If someone buys it for $60 and goes sells it on the side or sells it in Maryland, then we don't. So for me, designer bottles are one that have, as defined, some special aspect to them. There's a brand awareness to them that make them more special. I mean, you can walk into an ABC store in Maryland right now and pay $180 for Blanton's and pick it up. Whereas in Virginia, it comes out regulated. It comes out, periodically for $60 a bottle. There are things that are designer and there are things that are vintage, and that's what we tried to separate those two definitions so we could address them individually.
Delegate Krisak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A quick question for the patron and the expert. So in Maryland and DC, what does the code say there? How is it similar to the language you have here?
I don't have that. I don't have that information handy. I know Mr. Daniel may know. We did in our discussions talk about what other jurisdictions have done, both North Carolina, Kentucky, Washington D.C., and Maryland, where they do allow the sale of some of these more basic things. I don't specifically have that information, though. My apologies.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I have a question. Who else besides, say, you and your line of work would want to take advantage of these definitions? Or
by rule 3 VAC 57230, you must be a licensed auctioneer in the state of Virginia as regulated by DPOR. So we know that you have to be a licensed auctioneer, a state auctioneer certainly. There was an instance where a person had started a business to sell bourbon. They started it in Chantilly. I know ABC took issue with it and the way it was being handled. And they shut them down, who ultimately was the person that notified ABC of me. After that situation, that person and their business closed down, incorporated in Delaware, moved across into D.C., and resumed operation. So there's certainly that aspect where someone could come to the table. There are state auctioneers across the state of Virginia. There are commercial auctioneers across the state of Virginia. Often the commercial auctioneers use bankruptcy law to circumvent ABC rules. But there are plenty of estate auctioneers throughout the state that come across this instance.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could add to that answer. We're talking about licensed auctioneers. So it's not creating a secondary market for anybody. We're not exempting designer and vintage bottles from ABC regulations altogether. It's only to this limited class of people that are licensed by the state to do this other thing, which is to be auctioneers. So it's not like I understand that they worry about a slippery slope towards the secondary market. I don't share that concern because I think we're limiting it to auctioneers that do this and sell along with the silverware and the nice furniture and the mahogany dining room table and the nice liquor from the liquor cabinet. So I'm not as worried about this being a foot in the door to deregulation of spirits.
All right,
Really quickly, I wanted to answer my own question. I just realized we're a control state. Maryland, D.C. are not. That's the reasoning there. But I kind of agree with the Appropriations Chairman, who giving you another week maybe to work together. It seems like we're so close, and maybe like an or instead of an and with the Tanqueray example. I think there might be a way you guys can come to a meeting of the minds. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee? All right. There is no one in the queue because you're Mr. Quinn. You're on my list. And so is there anybody, we operate by motion?
Go ahead. I'd like to move this bill go by for the week, if I could. And we can then get a chance to check the regulations, see if they've had opportunity. I would ask, with the chairman's permission, or ask the chairman to ask them that maybe they could get together and see if they could work some sort of compromise. And then we'll, if the Uber chairman down there will maybe docket it for next week after the regulations come out, that would be my motion.
Second.
All right. So can you get your meeting of the minds?
Madam Chair, we will do our very best and appreciate the extra time and the thoughtful conversation. And I'm sure we'll get together and do our best to have a solution, or at least clarify where the differences are down to a very specific couple of items by the next meeting.
I think that's a voice vote.
All right. I think this is a voice vote, according to this chair. So all in favor of that, please?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, gentlemen, we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, so our next bill. All right, Delegate Freitas, we'll let you go next. And we have taken your House Bill 300 at your request by for the day.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Was there one bill you wanted to go with first?
Nope, I leave it up to you.
Okay, well, let's start with the fun one. Madam Chair, the one I think everyone's, so that would be HB 328. which allows for the privatization of current government stores under ABC, which are permitted to sell liquor. The bill is actually straightforward, but obviously has some pretty significant implications. What this would essentially allow for is for the ABC to sell off their retail stores, and then that would be now the province of the private sector. That is essentially what the bill does, and I'll be happy to take any questions or potentially insults from the committee.
Does any member of the committee have a question for Delegate Freitas?
It's just that good, Madam Chair. It's just so obvious to everyone.
I've got a motion, though.
Does anyone in the audience wish to speak to Delegate Freitas's bill? You're on your own. You stand alone. Is there anyone online? No? Okay. So, Delegate Knight, would you like to make a motion?
I'd move to lay this bill on the table.
Second.
All those in favor of the motion, signify by saying, oh wait, this is a recorded vote. All right. I'm going to learn this by the time the session's over. Okay. Please record your vote. All right, Delegate Freitas, you go down 8-0.
I'm glad I could contribute to bipartisanship within the General Assembly.
That's a first.
Madam Chair, my next bill, HB 387, what this says is this has to do with sales conducted on the premises by distillers. One of the problems that we have right now, one of our distilleries kind of face, is the idea that they essentially have to collect taxes and they get treated like an ABC store because that is the only way, and unfortunately still the only way, despite my best efforts last bill ago, in order for them to be able to sell their products. And what this essentially is attempting to do is saying that while we understand that they still have to be an ABC store, clearly they're not having to, a typical ABC store that you would drive to that's not in a distillery has to cover things like overhead, rental property, all of these additional things that an ABC store located in the distillery on the premises does not have to do. And what we're trying to do is allow them to recoup the additional costs which are taken out in taxes for when somebody is selling it in an ABC store that you would see on the mini mall or whatever it is versus what they're selling out of their distillery. So we're attempting to allow them to keep as much as they can with respect to that respective markup in the hands of the people that are actually producing it and running the store, and acknowledging that there is a difference between an ABC store located in the distillery versus one that we would see in other places. That is essentially what the bill does, and happy to take any questions from the committee.
Any member have any questions for Delegate Freitas? Seeing none, could we hear from ABC on this particular bill, please? If you have a position or not.
Good morning, afternoon, I guess, Madam Chair. Again, John Daniel for Virginia ABC. This is your markup bill, right? Yeah. So a couple of things. Obviously, there's going to be a fiscal impact to the general fund if the markup is taken out of this. I think that number is somewhere in the neighborhood of, do you all recall, 900? Yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure what the number is, but there is a FIS on the bill. Secondly, some of you all will recall 2 or 3 years ago when we were having a discussion with distillers, when their commission then was 8%, we agreed to go to the 20% number at the request of the distillers. And I should say, not all the distillers, as Delegate Freitas knows, are always in the room on these things. It's somewhat of a splinter group from time to time, but everybody was given the opportunity, and the resolve was to go from the 8 to the 20%, with the clear understanding that that's where we would stay for at least 5-year period. Whether or not that deal is a deal that in fact stays for 5 years or doesn't stay for 5 years is a policy decision for you all. But that's the history of where we are. So the 2 points, one, we went to 20% 3 years ago. The markup will have a fiscal impact on general fund dollars. That's part of our profit, currently part of our profit transfer.
All right. Delegate Knight has a question.
Mr. Daniel?
Yes, sir.
And Delegate Freitas, I think you'll remember that was my bill in there, and we made that happen in the budget to 20%. What is the difference between what Delegate Freitas is asking now and what's in code now with the 20%?
You know, I thought I had Delegate.
Maybe the delegate can answer me, either one.
He might.
Yeah.
Let me get out of the way here. I think I have that somewhere. Can I got to take a minute.
Is it in the fence?
1.6. Okay. My brain's back here tell me it's $1.6 million annually.
Okay, thank you. And I do remember that we went through this for 3 or 4 years, and we had a pretty big battle on it, and we did kind of overreach to the 20% a little bit, and if my memory serves me correctly, we said we're not going to come back and revisit this battle for a while, and I thought 4 or 5 years. But, you know, I don't know who agreed to it. I know I did. So, but anyways, it was, okay, I just wanted to put that out there for edification.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Anybody else in the audience wants to speak for or against? And I don't believe we have anyone online. Okay.
Probably so.
Okay. Anybody may make a motion?
I'll move to lay the bill on the table.
All right, this is a recorded vote. Delegate Freitas, sorry, your bill fails on a 7-1 vote.
I want to thank Delegate Campbell's efforts to free the bourbon. Thank you.
There you go. There you go. Delegate Bulova.
Afternoon, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon.
All right. So what I have is the cocktails to go bill. I do have a substitute, if I can go ahead and get that before y'all.
Second.
All right.
All agree to the substitute.
Did everyone agree to the substitute?
Aye.
All right. Anybody opposed? Great.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I think as all of y'all
Do we have
know,
that?
our restaurant industry was among the hardest hit in the pandemic, and that especially applies to a lot of our local neighborhood restaurants. Many of these local neighborhood restaurants do rely on specialty.
Can you hold for just 1
Oh,
second?
yeah, absolutely.
Is it up on LIS, the substitute? It is? Okay, it just came up? All right.
Wish I knew how to get that.
Here.
Good.
Can you go ahead, you can go ahead and explain.
Okay, perfect. So anyways, a lot of these small restaurants do rely on cocktail specialties for a lot of their income. And so that's a big part of the reason why Governor Northam, during his emergency order, of all the things that were in that emergency order, went ahead and authorized cocktails to go. And I can tell you from my experience in my district, that was a lifeline to a number of our small restaurants. It also came to be that people kind of enjoyed being able to get a cocktail to go from their favorite restaurant with their meal. And I will attest that I've availed myself of that, and it is pleasant, right, to be able to do takeout and come home and enjoy a cocktail from one of these establishments. And so last year, we had a bill that passed out of this committee that extended cocktails to go for a year. But with the proviso that we wanted to make sure that it could be done safely and that it was going to be done in a responsible manner. And so we directed ABC to put together a study in order to be able to report back to that. And I do want to thank the literally dozens of people who participated in that study. A lot of them who are sitting in this room today. If you look through the report, and it's actually a pretty thorough report, it's like 2 pages of just stakeholders who were involved in one way, shape, or form with that study. And I also want to just thank ABC for taking that so seriously and bringing that stakeholder group together. The bill before you today is a reflection of the recommendations that came out of that study. I think it's important, before I go into kind of what those recommendations were and how they're reflected here, is that a lot of the safeguards we put in last year are still in place. So that includes time limits, and so you're not allowed to send cocktails to go out later than 11 o'clock in the evening. There are still volume limits that are included in the bill. There is still a requirement that it has to include at least one mixer, so it's not just like pouring 16 ounces of Jack Daniels and sending it all off. It has to actually be a cocktail. Very importantly is that the restaurant must serve at least one meal per 2 cocktails, and so it's no different than if you were actually eating in the restaurant. And the containers have to be secure. However, there were a couple of things that the work group identified that needed to be tightened up. And there are really kind of 3 different categories for that. The first one deals with the containers. And so the idea was to make sure that we were strengthening the requirements for those containers. So 2 of the things that are in there, and there are a couple of items if you're curious, is making them more tamper evident and also labeling them to say contains alcoholic beverages. So it's really kind of a way to discourage people from opening it up in transit, but also a way for law enforcement to be able to see if it's been tampered with. And it also includes a lot clearer guidelines in terms of how it needs to be stored in your vehicle. The biggest part and the most important part of this bill deals with third-party deliveries. And so as part of their due diligence, ABC kind of tested the system, and they found some real problems when it came to independent third-party deliveries with respect to enforcement. Now, I think the really important thing is that it exposed a weakness that wasn't just cocktails to go. It exposed a weakness, quite frankly, with respect to beer and to wine. And so it's a larger issue that we need to go ahead and tackle, and so that is tackled here in this particular bill. And so we do create a brand new third-party delivery license for all alcoholic beverages. And the idea is to make sure that that third-party deliverer has skin in the game, that they've also got liability, and that they have a reason to go ahead and do enforcement and compliance. So that's a really, really important part of this. The final part is that we do put in another sunset clause on here, right? So I think we're moving in the right direction. But everybody agreed, or there was consensus, that we should have another 2-year sunset. And that way we can go ahead and have ABC continue to monitor the enforcement and to see if this is working properly. The amendment in the nature of a substitute that you adopted earlier on dealt with a couple issues that were brought up with the third-party deliveries. I want to thank particularly Uber for really taking this very seriously in terms of addressing the problem. One of the areas that they were concerned about is that to get a license, the driver couldn't have been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude. That's one of those kind of terms of art that you know it when you see it, but it's really hard when you're interviewing a driver to say, have you been convicted of moral turpitude? And so ABC went back and thought about it and said, well, what do we really mean by that? And so they kind of came up with their checklist of disqualifiers in order to get that particular license. There was some clarifying language in terms of replacing delivery with transport through completion of delivery, because delivery can still include in the restaurant, so they just wanted to make sure it was the part where it was being transported. And there are a couple of technical amendments. So, Madam Chair, that is the bill. Hopefully it provides a responsible way to move forward with cocktails to go, while especially addressing the issue dealing with beer, wine, and cocktails with third-party deliveries in general. There might be a couple other amendments that are floating out there. I don't think they're anything that upset the apple cart. What I'm hoping is that we're able to, if you act favorably, we'll go ahead and continue to work on those. There is a Senate companion that will be coming your way, and so we'll be able to hopefully take care of any minor technical amendments at that point. But, Madam Chair, that's the bill. Happy to take any questions, and know there are people out here who would like to speak on the bill one way or the other.
All right, any member of the committee have questions for Delegate Bulova? All right, members of the audience who would like to speak in favor of this bill?
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, I'm Tom Lisk, representing the Virginia Restaurant, Lodging, and Travel Association. We appreciate Delegate Bulova's leadership on this issue. This really has been an important issue for the restaurant community, and we urge your support of the bill. Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the subcommittee, Sarah Thomas here on behalf of the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington. I wanted to express our support for this bill and the 2-year extension, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to participate in the ABC work group and all of the work that Delegate Bulova has done. So with that, thank you.
Madam Chair, Jeff Palmore on behalf of Uber and Uber Eats. Want to thank ABC, want to thank Delegate Bulova for bringing this bill and putting forward the amendments that we just discussed, and we support the amendments.
Delegate Knight has a question for you.
I believe I read in this, we were perusing it, it looks like any delivery company of over 25 vehicles has a $7,500 fee, and anyone under has a $2,500 fee. You're aware of that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Cindy DeFranco with Virginia Spirits Association. I echo the comment to the previous speakers and also want to thank the active participants of the work group and the patron for some really solid leadership. So we urge you to pass the bill.
We obviously support the bill. I want to thank David Bolivar for his work on staying with us during the course of the year, and all the stakeholders that are back here. It was, I think, 60-some people that have worked on what you're looking at here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for any of the people who've just spoken? Okay, anybody want to speak against the bill?
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the committee.
Okay.
There were actually 62 members of the stakeholders committee from the ABC, and they put out a 22-page report, which I read. Of the 62 members, 2 were restaurants. Everybody else was really ABC, beer, wine wholesalers, attorneys, Uber Eats, people that make money off this. That's fine. I'm an operations guy. I've been doing it for 40 years. I own a bunch of restaurants. I'm building restaurants now for folks. And it's not about alcohol, about cocktails to go being put in the system. I understand when the governor did it, it really is a small amount of money. But that being said, in the legislation, the enforcement's impossible. You've got alcohol, which is undetermined how much you put in. You got to put a mixer in it, but it's still 4 16-ounce containers where you have to put a sticker on top of the straw so that we don't know what the containers are. So that needs to be worked out. The second thing is you can put it in a car. Somebody pulls up, they can get 4 16-ounce cocktails with some food, put it into a car. One person, the driver, gives you an ID. 3 in the back could be 18, who knows, could be 12. It's hard enough in the operations side, but when you walk into a restaurant and somebody comes in and they're intoxicated, you say, buddy, why don't you have a glass of water? Let me call you a cab, whatever. Or you order 5 shots of tequila. You say, well, where's it going? And you look at the table to see if anybody's underage or if they've already been carded. This takes all this and puts it in a new playing field because ABC can't enforce it. They're not enforcing the Uber driver as they drive. Like they come into our restaurants and they look at our license and see who's trained and who's, what kind of training they've gone through with ABC. So the problem is not with the alcohol to go, it's with the fact that you can't enforce it and you're encouraging in a time, ABC's gone from $800,000 to $1.4 billion in the last 5 years. Congratulations. A lot of that has not slowed down during the pandemic. This is not a big money maker for anybody, except for the people that are selling the booze. My point is that if you can't manage it because it's off-site, it's going to a house, you don't know who's in the house except for the person who comes to the door, it's going into a car. In this bill, you can go out to the parking lot and give 4 16-ounce liquor drinks to the occupants of the car. And that kind of defies everything the ABC's been about for the last 45 years in protecting the consumer. We are a very well-controlled state. ABC does an excellent job. The sales are terrific. The bottom line to the General Assembly is very high. It all's working, but when you have an exception like the pandemic, and then you make an exception, and then you look at the reporting is impossible. They're not going to write on every single thing that it's an alcoholic beverage. They haven't decided on the container that they're going to put it in. We don't know who the underage drinkers are in the car or in the house. Not to say you can't get around it if you want to, but why deliver it to somebody in the parking lot in their car? So the problem is not with alcohol to go. so much as it is that this bill needs some work. And what they put into the changes don't address what I just suggested is the problem with the bill. Are there any questions?
Anybody have any questions for the witness? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak?
Typically, I don't speak before y'all. I've been in business for 44 years. I think this is the worst.
Sir, can you
piece
just
of-
identify yourself?
This is the worst piece of legislation I think I've seen in 44 years. I'm sorry to say that, but it is. It can't be controlled. So you asked me, the ABC asked us to card everyone, be sure everyone in the restaurant is 21 years old, and not to serve intoxicated people. So for you to approve that I can deliver 16 ounces of liquor to a car with one ID just doesn't make sense to me. So I think you might consider 1 year extension, only 8 ounces with a maximum of 1.25 ounces of mixed beverage, and have the ABC board with a clear path of enforcement. They don't have the means to enforce this bill. A lot of people are going to get killed. I would suggest you modify it or defeat this bill. Thank you.
All right. Any members have any questions? All right. Dave, you want to make a last statement?
No, I appreciate your consideration greatly. I think when it comes to enforcement issues, I've got a lot of faith and trust in our ABC, especially when they've taken an entire year to go ahead and study this issue and come up with a bill before you. Cognizant, that I can right now drink a bottle of wine at a restaurant, finish only half of it, and by law, I can go ahead and take that into my car. I think the nice thing about this bill is that through the third-party licensor process, it gets at a larger issue with respect to third-party deliveries. And so I think you could easily argue that instead of getting easier, we're actually increasing enforcement. And I think that's a really good thing, while we're also able to go ahead and allow people to enjoy cocktails to go and help our small businesses.
Committee?
I have a motion.
Delegate Knight?
I move to approve the substitute.
All right.
Call for the vote.
Call for the vote, yep.
Move to reports.
Do we ever move to report?
I move to report the substitute, yes.
I guess we had to do a voice vote on approving the substitute. I thought we already did that.
You already did it.
That's what I thought. And Delegate Wolva, your bill passes 7-1.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, we now have Delegate Fowler. You have two bills before the committee.
You want him down front or here? Doesn't matter. It's up to you.
Betty, do you want to present, and Delegate Fowler, you want to present from here or down front?
I can do it right here, okay?
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
All right, the first one, House Bill 20, Madam Chair.
Yes, that's fine.
All right, Madam Chair, House Bill 20 basically establishes a funding stream for the Virginia Spirits Promotion Fund by requiring 20% of the 20% tax levied by ABC attributable to the sale of spirits by a licensed distiller to be deposited in the fund. Madam Chairman, the Virginia Spirits Board was established in 2020 within the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. The Virginia Spirits Board promotes the interests of distillers, farmers, and forestry in the Commonwealth through research, education, and marketing. The board is modeled and will operate in a similar manner to the Virginia Wine Board. This legislation will help establish an ongoing funding mechanism for the Spirits Promotion Fund. These funds will allow the Virginia Spirits Board to promote the burgeoning industry that currently consists of 91 distilleries with an average of 14 employees per distillery, Madam Chairman. The funding mechanism established by the legislation is modeled off the Virginia Wine Promotion Fund. And, Madam Chairman, the Northam administration introduced budget has already included $952,375 in each year of the biennium as a seed fund, Madam Chairman. I believe that's all I have. We have some testimony to receive, Madam Chair.
Any members have any questions for Delegate Fowler before the testimony? Okay.
Madam Chairman, committee members, thank you for having me. My name is David Cutno. I am the CEO and founder of Reservoir Distillery. I'm also the Virginia Spirits Board Chairman. I'm a member of the VDA, and I'm a 14-year industry veteran here in Virginia. I'm here to speak for the industry as a whole and encourage you to support this bill. It, again, as Delegate Fowler stated, is following exactly the way that the Wine Board has been put together, which over the last, since the 80s, has shown a tremendous boon for that industry. Currently, coming right out of the pandemic, there could not be a better time to establish funding for a promotion board like this to assist all the small businesses that are just coming out of a very, very tough period of time that many of them stopped production of their own products in order to make sanitizer in the beginning of the pandemic as well. So thank you for hearing me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to address them.
Not seeing any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to speak in favor of the bill? Anyone want to speak opposed to the bill? All right. We have a note that this bill will need to be referred to appropriations. So react on motion.
Madam Chair, move to report and refer to appropriations.
I hear a second on that. So please cast your vote. All right, Delegate Fowler, your bill, you're 1 for 1 right now. You're passed 8-0.
Don't crush your luck.
Madam Chair, the next bill is this is a pretty easy bill, Madam Chairman. House Bill 1251. If we look down here at subsection A, you'll see a whole kinds of list of things that the ABC can currently sell. But of course, one thing that they're not allowed to sell is something called non-alcoholic spirits. House Bill 1251 rectifies that, Madam Chairman, will allow the ABC to also sell non-alcoholic spirits. And so that's essentially what the bill does, Madam Chairman. And I believe we have some expert testimony here.
Sir, would you like to speak in favor of this bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm Tom Lisk, wearing a different hat. I represent Diageo North America. I'm a large producer of distilled spirits. Lifestyle changes, health reasons, and just choices are driving people non-alcoholic spirits as an alternative, particularly with millennials who are looking for the experience of a cocktail, but necessarily not the calories or some of the other effects of cocktails, particularly during the week. So we see a growing trend of people choosing to have non-alcoholic cocktails, think of non-alcoholic rum, non-alcoholic gin as a cocktail on occasion. So we think this is a healthy an alternative that ABC should be able to offer. It does not mandate that ABC sell them. It just gives them the flexibility as a retailer should they want to choose to offer non-alcoholic spirits with their other offerings. ABC currently can sell Virginia wine and mixers. This would just be one non-alcoholic alternative other than mixers. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Delegate Krisak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple questions. As a teetotaler, this excites me. But I'm just worried about two things. One is that when somebody goes in and they think they're buying some alcoholic gin, they come home and then they're drinking it and they have 2-3 bottles and they're no effect. We got to make
Madam Chairman,
we got to make sure the labeling is. I know. Well, they'll keep drinking until they have some. But in all seriousness, is it really a spirit if it's non-alcoholic?
It does not meet the current definition of a spirit, hence the need for the legislation. But it will have the taste and texture of a spirit, so that when someone mixes it as a cocktail, they would have the sensation of drinking a spirit. But it would be labeled very clearly that it is non-alcoholic in content and would be marketed as such.
Any other questions from any member of the committee? All right. Anyone else in favor or opposed to the bill? We don't have anybody virtually lined up to speak to this bill. All right, committee. Do I hear a motion?
I move to report.
second.
All right, we've had a motion and a second, so please cast your vote. Delegate Fowler, we'll close the roll, and your bill has passed 8-0. 2 for 2. All right. That completes our business for today, unless anyone has any announcements or anything they want to say as far as the committee is concerned. We stand adjourned. All right, I'm going to give